This is The Jason Jones Show, powered by Mudhouse Media. Now, here's Jason Jones.
Aloha, everybody, and welcome to The Jason Jones Show. We have a great interview for you today. Salih Hudayar, who is the Prime Minister for the East Turkistan government in exile. East Turkestan was invaded by China, and they have been under a brutal dictatorship, suffering a horrible ethnic cleansing. And we talked to Salih today about not only what's happening to the Uyghur, 3 million in concentration camps, the harvesting of organs, and the countless unthinkable abuses that China is doing to the Uyghur and other ethnic and religious minorities, but also the State Department's recent report of illegal nuclear arms tests by China, the disappearance of democracy advocates and human rights activists in Hong Kong. There is nobody in the world more on top of the abuses of the Communist Party of China. First, the Uyghur, all of the people of China, the brutalizing of Hong Kong, and of course today all of the world is suffering because of the Communist Party of China. So let's get on with the interview with Salih. And this episode has been brought to you by the Vulnerable People Project, standing in solidarity with the vulnerable. Join the great campaign to promote human dignity and inspire solidarity with the vulnerable at thegreatcampaign.org. That is www.thegreatcampaign.org. And for a $20 donation, you get a free copy of my book, The Race to Save Our Century, 5 Core Principles to Promoting a Culture of Life, Love, and Freedom. All right, on with the show. Prime Minister Salih Hudayar. Aloha, Salih. It's great to have you back on the Jason Jones Show.
Aloha, Jason. Thank you for having me.
I feel a little embarrassed calling you Salih. You're my brother. You're my very close friend, but you are now also the Prime Minister-elect at the government in exile of East Turkestan. What is the appropriate, what am I supposed to call you? What would be what's the appropriate title?
You can call me the Prime Minister, but since we have a good relationship, I don't mind you calling me by my name.
Okay. All right. And if I'm ever President of the United States or Secretary of General of the United Nations or Supreme Court Justice, you can call me Jason. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Although that'll never happen. So, Salih, you are my favorite guest to have on the Jason Jones Show. You are the reason why I created this show. Sometimes we try to get a little silly, and that's to grow an audience, to be honest. Our real goal, the real goal of this show is to unite a community around the world to be in solidarity with the vulnerable. And vulnerable communities change, right? There's a time when the most vulnerable people in the world lived in Berlin or in Paris or in Sudan. But today, the most vulnerable people in the world are the Uyghur and other ethnic and religious minorities in Chinese-occupied East Turkestan. So to have you, the Prime Minister at large, or the Prime Minister for the government in exile of East Turkestan, is a great privilege, and to have you talk to our audience. But, the problem, I wrote a book, The Race to Save Our Century, and the argument of my book was that when we failed to resist the Turkish genocide of the Assyrians, the Chaldeans, the Armenians, the Greeks, and others, it was inevitable that it would erupt around the world. And what was what we thought was hemmed in a little corner of the world, it erupted into a century that saw 160 million dead. And we were behaving as if we thought the Communist Party of China's crimes could be locked up in East Turkestan or locked up in China. But now we see the disappearing of countless thousands of democracy activists in Hong Kong. We see the CCP flu devastating the world and and inciting governments to behave in a tyrannical way around the world. And Salih, the reason I wanted to have you on today is maybe we could talk a little bit about Hong Kong and the CCP flu. But now, if those weren't horrible enough, it's being reported by our own State Department that the Communist Party of China is now engaging in illegal, secret nuclear tests. Can you talk to us about that?
Yes, thank you so much again for having me, Jason. As you know, the Chinese government, one of the reasons I think that this coronavirus was deliberately spread across the world by the Chinese government is to, take the international spotlight away from the situation, the atrocities in East Turkestan, the protests, freedom protest movements in Hong Kong, and, keep, the international community, away from all this, while at the same time weakening, Western economies, the Western world, to where they won't be able to deal with China. More recently, as you mentioned, the State Department earlier this last week stated that, they have reports that China might be secretly testing nuclear weapons in East Turkestan. What many people don't know is that between 1964 and 1996, the Chinese government tested some 46 nuclear tests. And according to a Japanese professor back in 2009, he revealed that some 750,000 civilian deaths occurred as a direct result of these nuclear tests, which also left millions of people exposed to, nuclear radiation, which later developed into, birth defects, various cancerous types of diseases.
You know what's horrific about this? In September of 1945, a Catholic priest at the time who became a well-known bishop and actually Emmy Award-winning television host named Bishop Fulton Sheen, he criticized the United States. This was in September 1945 in a lecture at the Catholic University of America. And Bishop Fulton Sheen said that when the United States dropped those atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, it paved the way to remove all barriers. And then that it was a devastating, he said, I predict this will have a devastating impact on how we as a country see life. Then, after the Roe versus Wade decision, Bishop Fulton Sheen reflected on that talk he gave in 1945, and he said, Roe v. Wade became inevitable on August 6th, 1945. The fruit of a nuclear bomb, an atomic bomb, is abortion. And then Mother Teresa said, and I don't think she was aware of Bishop Fulton Sheen's comments, Mother Teresa said, the fruit of abortion will be nuclear war. We have a country in the Communist Party of China that has no problem literally Communist Party officials have no problem forcing their own daughters and wives to have abortions. No problem. And I'm sure they do. I'm sure they're tormented, but they do what they're told. They have, there is no opposition that we can see to the internment of 3 million Uyghur, to the harvesting of organs, to the worst kinds of crimes. So to have a regime like the Communist Party of China, truly the most brutal regime from the Great Famine that they caused, to the Cultural Revolution, to the one-child policy, to the CCP flu, and now we have the ramping up of nuclear tests. I just am going to echo Fulton Sheen and Mother Teresa and say the fruit of the one-child policy is the Wuhan flu. The fruit of the one-child policy is the internment of the Uyghur. And the fruit of the one-child policy will be China using nuclear weapons. So as prime minister in exile for a country that is being brutalized in a way that there are very few comparisons in history, very few. The Germans in Polynesia and the Jewish populations. But what would be your advice to the State Department? What would be your advice to the Trump administration? What would be your advice to the American citizens to resist this? What do I do with my little podcast? What do we do, Salih?
So one of one of the first things that we need to do is, as the United States government, something that the U.S. government, the State Department, the White House can do is recognize the Chinese Communist Party as a terrorist organization that it is. It's a illegitimate government. It was never elected. Nobody elected the Chinese Communist Party to rule China, or nobody elected the Chinese Communist Party to come into East Turkestan and occupy it. So we can't be giving them that legitimacy by letting them represent a billion people and other occupied nations. That's one of the first things that we can do. The second thing is to engage in trade sanctions and Magnitsky Act sanctions against the officials, the high-level Chinese Communist Party officials that are responsible for these atrocities. We need to pull out, American companies need to pull out of China and come back to the United States or go to other countries that actually have some respect for human rights, for human life. As individuals, we need to pressure our members of Congress to, recognize the atrocities that China is committing in East Turkestan as a genocide before it gets to the level of, a full-scale Holocaust-like mass extermination campaign. We need to, recognize East Turkestan as an occupied country and, treat it on par, at least with the issue of Tibet, at least the issue of other like-minded countries and peoples.
Salih, just last week, a new neighbor came into my house and he saw my dopa, and he asked me about it, and I was sharing with him about the Uyghur. And when I said that there are 3 million ethnic and religious minorities in occupied East Turkestan in concentration camps, he literally laughed. He laughed because he didn't believe it. He thought that it was some kooky conspiracy theory. Are there any surveys on awareness? What percentage of Americans are aware of what the CCP is doing?
To my knowledge, there hasn't been really a survey done on what percent of Americans are aware, but I wouldn't say, I don't think even 50% of Americans are aware. I think more likely 20 to 35% of Americans, are aware about what's going on. The overwhelming majority of Americans are clueless. Many don't even know who the Uyghurs are or where East Turkestan is. So that's one of the biggest issues that we're having.
Are there any influencers in the media, celebrities that have been speaking out? One of the videos that I saw that seemed to get the most traction was just a young girl who's an influencer on makeup. And she made a video on how to put on eyeliner. And as she was talking about how to put an eyeliner, in the middle of it, she switched to tell the story about what's happening in occupied East Turkestan. And I think that had millions of views. Have you seen that?
Yes, I've seen that video. Shortly after that video, you had, Arsenal footballer.
Oh, that's right.
Ozil. He spoke out on Twitter and on his social media profiles about East Turkestan. You had various other, sports people, boxers and footballers speak out as well. But on like a political level, we haven't had much. We had for the first time in, 70 years since East Turkestan was occupied, that we had a member of the United States Congress, Congressman Ted Yoho, deliver a 10-minute speech in which he, specifically talked about East Turkestan, how it was occupied, and the mass atrocities that China was committing in East Turkestan.
Well, are you getting any information out of East Turkestan on how the COVID crisis is being used as a cover for ramping up atrocities?
Yes. So we're getting a little bit information, not a whole lot. The Chinese government has declared, any information on the coronavirus in East Turkestan as a state secret. But after, the coronavirus had spread all across China and East Turkestan, the Chinese government began to round up young Uyghur and other Turkic men and women to send to Chinese provinces to help, work in the the factories is what they're saying. They're sending in as help, but it's really slave labor to, continue to boost China's economy in the areas that have been heavily affected by the coronavirus.
It's unbelievable. And you recently, I'm just looking at your Facebook now, you have a post. We are happy to see the U.S. intelligence community turn its attention to the plight of East Turkestan. Tell us about that post on your Facebook page.
So the NGA, the National Geospatial Agency, and RAND Corporation, they seem to have been working on a project to highlight the aftermath or the result of China's mass internment of millions of Uyghurs. More specifically, they're looking at the mass internment or the mass family separation of over 500,000 Uyghur, Kazakh, and other Turkic children from their families and being sent to state-run orphanages or boarding schools to be educated and raised as loyal Chinese citizens.
You know, how this is not the front page of every newspaper in the world is unbelievable.
It is. It's very sad. A lot of media attention has been, taken away from the issue on East Turkestan. Everybody's talking about the coronavirus. And another thing is, the Chinese government doesn't let journalists into East Turkestan. Many of them have been harassed, and so many journalists actually have been booted out of China, out of Beijing and other parts of China for going to East Turkestan and covering the issue. So major outlets are afraid to lose access to China as a result of this situation.
Well, Salih, when I set out this year with my organization, the Vulnerable People Project, it was amplify our influence. That's our goal, and I pray that your organization amplifies its influence, the East Turkestan National Awakening Movement. How do people, I want everyone listening, you guys have to follow Salih on social media. You have to follow his organization, the East Turkestan National Awakening Movement. Salih, what's the best way to do that? And we'll also put it in the show notes.
So the best way is to visit us on our website, nationalawakening.org, or to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, ET Awakening.
All right, and give us one assignment to do but before we have you back on again in the next week or two.
So the most basic thing that everyone can do is write to their senators and urge them to pass the Uyghur Act, which is Senate Resolution Senate 178, Senate Bill 178, to pass that act. It has already been passed by the House of Representatives with an overwhelming 408 against 1, and we just need it to be passed by the Senate so we can get it to President Trump to sign it into law.
And is there, on your website, do you have information on the act?
Yes.
And Senator Rubio has introduced it in the Senate, right?
Yes.
So it's the same one. So what is the timeline look on that? Is it being held up? Are they just being distracted? Or are there senators kneeling before the CCP and not putting it on the president's desk?
So it seems that Senator Mitch McConnell's office, he's the Senate Majority Leader, he is responsible for scheduling the bill for vote. It was actually passed by the Senate overwhelmingly back on September 11, 2019, and then pushed on to the House. The House, they changed it up a little bit and sent it back to the Senate, and it's just been sitting in limbo since then.
And how long has that been?
It's been about 5 months now.
Okay, Salih. So we are going to do that, and guys, I'm going to put it in the show notes. Salih, the beautiful thing how God created the human family is we have no choice but to be in solidarity. We have no choice but to suffer together. The difference is if we choose to bear the sufferings of others, the suffering goes away. For all of us, if we let it fester in one community, all of us will suffer inescapably together. And the destiny of the Uyghur and the destiny of every man, woman, and child in the world now, it's obvious we are all suffering together. My friend in Kenya said, I have to wear a mask when I go outside. There's a $5,000 fine and 6 months in prison. my friends in Turkey and all across the United States, the world is suffering because of the Communist Party of China. We stand in solidarity with the Uyghur, or we suffer together indefinitely. We must all stand up to the Communist Party of China. The Communist Party of China is a terrorist organization. Salih, I thank you for being relentless. I thank you for shouldering this burden and not trying to escape it, and being committed not only to your people, but to the United States of America. Thank you for coming on the Jason Jones Show, Salih.
Thank you, and God bless.
Aloha. All right, guys, this is the one interview I want you to share. I was going to put it on with my interview with Kevin Sorbo, which is going to come out tomorrow, but I thought this show belongs to stand alone, and that's why it's a different kind of ending. So make sure you share this show. Share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, and go into the show notes and see how you can contact your senator. Again, this episode has been brought to you by the Vulnerable People Project. Join the great campaign to promote a culture of life at www.thegreatcampaign.org. Join me tomorrow with the one, the only, Hercules, Kevin Sorbo. Peace.
This has been The Jason Jones Show, powered by Mudhouse Media.